Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
In this episode, we welcome Scott Wolter, forensic geologist, author, and investigator, to discuss the mysterious connections between the Knights Templar, early Atlantic voyages, secret societies, ancient inscriptions, and pirates. Did the Templar story really end with the destruction of the order, or did survivors carry their knowledge, symbols, and traditions across the Atlantic? And could some of that hidden history later become connected with the pirates who dominated the seas? Scott Wolter joins us to investigate the evidence and controversy behind lost treasure of the Knights Templars and pirates. Okay, so, Scott, people are going to go wild over this stuff. How are Templars, Freemasonry, and pirates all linked?
Well, that's one of the enduring mysteries of, that's out there. Is there a connection between pirates and the Templars and Freemasonry? And I think the answer is probably, because, it's not like you're going to find a document somewhere that says, okay, we're going to officially be pirates, and by the way, Masons are officially, going to be pirates, or, it's one of those sort of murky areas that you have to sort of piece together the evidence to see if the weight of that evidence supports that conclusion. And I think the conclusion is that it does, but it's not an all or nothing thing. I think you have certain instances where you have pirates that people that might have been privateers that were legal pirates at one point that sort of crossed the line, as they say that Captain Kidd did. Was he dealing with Freemasons? Was he a Freemason himself? That's hard to tell. I think there's no question that he was dealing with Freemasons. And then you go back a little bit farther. Was there interactions with Templars? I think there was. And I think we were able to make a strong case for that in the new show. Well, you know what? It is a cocktail of ingredients that, it's how can it miss? And I think it's a really good show. I think, but in real life there have been some challenges and some difficulties. If you want me to be perfectly honest, and I prefer to be that way. And what happened was when Barry started finding artifacts, and most notably that metal ingot that he said was a silver bar, that caused a lot of excitement. I mean, it made international news, and a lot of people got excited, and it as you saw on the show, it's got some interesting symbols on it that resonated with me. But what happened in real life was UNESCO, the world organization that oversees these historical sites and all over the world. They jumped in and they said they were going to go check out the site. I mean, if you make a claim that you found Captain Kidd's treasure, you're going to get attention. And that's exactly what Barry said, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. But the problem I have with the whole thing is UNESCO issued a press release a month and a half before they even came to the site, saying what they think they were going to find, and it was all negative. Barry didn't do this right, and this can't be the Adventure Galley, and we don't think it's this and that and the other thing. And they really set up a self-fulfilling prophecy, because eventually when they did show up, that's exactly what they said, and it caused a lot of consternation at the network and amongst a lot of people. But the reality is, and make no mistake, I'm not I've met Barry, and, I get along just fine with Barry, but I'm not here to try to defend Barry. I'm a neutral observer, and I don't think it's appropriate for any organization, much less somebody that we all look at as this international organization trying to preserve and maintain historic sites, for them to come out with the statement about what they think they're going to find a month and a half before they show up. That's just inappropriate and unethical. Yeah. So I smell a rat here, and I don't like it. It's really interesting because, of course, a lot of people, and just so you have a little background information, UNESCO, when they showed up at the site, they looked at the bar and they said that it was lead, not silver. And of course, people have been asking me, well, you're a geologist, didn't you test it? Well, the reality is, to this day, I've never seen the silver bar. All I've seen are pictures. And what I read in UNESCO's report is that they ran a scratch test. Well, lead and silver have about the same hardness. They are slightly different, but you cannot tell the difference between the two metals with a scratch test. And it's very easy to test for it. You just need a very small little piece that nobody would even notice was missing. Mm-hmm. But to my knowledge, that testing has never been done. So, on one hand, it's caused a controversy, and I think what they were trying to do was take the steam out of Barry's discovery. But the other part of the problem is if you go back to 1700, lead was just as important as silver, and in some cases it was more important than silver. Silver was not a precious metal. They were looking for gold. And oftentimes silver was used as ballast in ships. And lead, especially for pirates, would be just as important, if not more important, because they use it for their cannonballs and their lead shot for their guns. So it was a very important metal. And, people look at it today like it's worthless, but you have to go back to the time period. And, I mean, if you get right down to it, they were about the same equal value. But for my purposes on the show, it didn't matter what it was made of. It was the symbols that were on the bar that were important to me. They look very similar. I guess my inclination when I looked at it, it looked more like silver to me, but that doesn't really mean anything. You have to test it. Yeah. But again, at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. I mean, you can say and try to make it sound worthless, but if it was worthless, then why did they stamp it and carve those initials on it like you would any other ingot of a precious metal? So I don't really understand why they're trying to minimize it and say it doesn't have value, when of course it had value. It was 110 pounds, man. I mean, that's a heavy thing. So regardless of what it was, I think it's a significant find. And like I said, the symbols were just fantastic on it. And it's just too bad that UNESCO stuck their nose in, and it really caused problems for the network. And it's just a shame how politics get involved in things when they really it wasn't necessary in this case. Yes.
The perfect lunch combo. That first bite of your favorite sub, followed by ice-cold Pepsi. Add a couple of friends, and now that's next level. Suddenly, the laughs get louder, the stories keep flowing, and the food tastes better. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
It was the first thing I saw when I saw the picture. I said, that's a triple tau. And the triple tau was the most important symbol in York Rite Freemasonry. And in the Royal Arch degree, it is the most important symbol. And at one point, I think we showed, and if you go onto my website or my blog spot, you will see the latest posting that I put up about something called the Hooked X Tau. If you scroll through the photographs, you'll see a Masonic apron of the Royal Arch degree. Mm-hmm. And what you see at the top middle of the flap is the triple tau symbol, the same symbol that's on that silver bar. Sure. But it's inside of a delta triangle and a circle. And within Freemasonry, both of those symbols are symbolic of the deity. So to have a triple tau inside of that tells you it's pretty darn important. It started with the ivory Christ figure that Barry had found actually several years ago. on one of the shipwrecks, and he was scratching his head trying to figure out where it came from, and he just had a feeling, and he had a feeling from the get-go that it was somehow connected to the Knights Templar. So when we had that initial conversation when the show started, the first time I met him, he really emphasized that point. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to talk about the Templars, you need to go where the story starts for them, and that's Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Jerusalem, and I did a number of things while I was there, but I did go to some museums, and I tried to find examples of Christ figures from the Crusader period, but I couldn't find anything that looked like the one that Barry had. I did get a lead when I was doing some research about a Christ figure made of ivory that looked very similar to the one that Barry had, but that came out of the Iberian Peninsula in Portugal. So that was my next stop, and I went to Tomar, and that was amazing. Oh my gosh, it was just incredible to go to Tomar, which was a city that was founded by the Knights Templar in 1161 by the Grand Master at the time. His name was Gualdin Pais, and he fought in the Second Crusade in Jerusalem. And when he went back to Portugal, he built the city of Tomar as a replication of the city of Jerusalem. So the important churches in that town are symbolic of some of the important places in Jerusalem, including the castle and the monastery at the top of the hill, which was symbolic of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Well, that was amazing because I was, we had some local experts that were on, that were with us when we were filming. And one of them identified himself as a Freemason and a Masonic Knights Templar in Portugal. And, he recognized that I understood Freemasonry pretty well. So we were talking kind of behind the scenes, and he explained to me, he was telling me off camera about this initiation ceremony and where it was in the monastery and the castle. And I went, oh my God, we got to go see that. And so I pulled him aside and I said, would it be all right if we filmed on camera and told the audience the ritual that a Templar, a person who is initiated into the Templar order, what the ritual is? And he said, wow. Yeah, go ahead. Wow. So we did that, and it was an abbreviated version of it, but it's a pretty amazing experience that the candidate goes through, including being thrown inside of a small chamber, in the ground for 3 days, blindfolded with nothing but bread and water. And if they survive that physical test, then they are released. If they don't call out beforehand and fail the test, they're brought out, and then they have to pass the mental test, the intellectual test, by answering 3 questions. And if they answer them successfully, then the blindfold is removed. They realize, I was about to tell you that once they answer the 3 questions for the intellectual part of the examination, then if they answer them successfully, then they remove the blindfold and they realize they're standing under the 9th keystone, which is a symbol of the sun with a rose in the middle, which is a female symbol. So you have the male and the female, the duality represented right there, and then they are illuminated in the rays of the sun, and they have been initiated as a new Templar Knight. And that was so cool. It was just so neat to be there, and that's where that actual initiation took place back during the Templars' time. Mm-hmm. To be there was just a real thrill. Well, and I think that's one of the really important things that I came to realize while filming the show, is that the narrative about the Knights Templar, that everybody believes, is that in 1307, the King of France, Philip the Fair, and the Vatican basically arrested, tortured, and burned the Templars and put down the order, and that was the end of it. Well, the reality is they only arrested and tortured and burned knights in France. Now, it was their headquarters, but believe me, they were just fine. In fact, only 15, I think if you want to stretch it, maybe as many as 20% of the order were affected in France, but that left 80 to 85% of the Templar order in other parts of Europe and Scandinavia and into the Holy Land that were unaffected by any of this. So what they did is they simply went underground, but they continued to exist. But in Portugal, because the Templars were so important in defending Portugal from the Moors attacking from the south, the King and Queen of Portugal said, there's no way we're going to give up our fighting force and surrender to the Moors. Forget it. We're not getting rid of the Templars. And so what they did is they simply changed their name to the Order of Christ. But they continued on as an official Templar order. And so the narrative that the Templars ended in 1307 is wrong. They were an official order all the way for another 500 years until they were finally dissolved in Portugal in 1835. I mean, that's not even 200 years ago. That's incredible. But so the Templars didn't exist for about 200 years, just over 200 years. They existed for over 700 years as an official order. And the thing about it is they conducted most of their operations in secret, and they were going all over the world, certainly to the Americas, as I suggested all along, but they were going to the Far East, they were going to India, to Africa, all through the Indian Ocean. So it's really an amazing story, and the extent of their operations and their interaction with pirates and who knows who else. It's a fascinating story. Well, that was really, for me, that was a big clue. And, I had read about Tristan da Cunha before, and I'd seen some of the information about his sailing to Madagascar. And he was part of a group of guys that went, and 3 of the ships were marooned. They went aground on the sand, and they were marooned. 800 men, and they were Templars, were marooned on Madagascar. And eventually, they lost about 200 of their people in the first 3 weeks of where they went aground and sort of set up a base camp on the southeastern side of Madagascar. But they decided to get out of there. So 600 men marched south about 150 miles, and they ended up building that structure that you saw that I found in the woods. Now, this was known about historically, but has anybody ever heard about it? I mean, I never did. I don't know anybody who has. That was completely new to everybody that I talked to. And the question is, what was that structure built for? Did they store their weapons, their treasure? It wasn't big enough for people to live in, so I think it was just a safe house, if you will. But it was also built at the top of a granite intrusion, and so it was about 2 miles from the ocean. But it would have been plastered on the out. It was still plastered on the outside. The plaster had fungus and mold on it, so it wasn't white anymore. But back in the day, it would have been like a white beacon shining at the top of the hill. So I believe they did that so that they could be seen to be rescued. And as it turns out, now this was not in the show. I thought for sure it would be because we did film this. But we told the story of what happened to those 600 men. They were there for almost 2 years after they got to the southern part of the island. And they established relationships with the local indigenous people. They didn't exactly treat them very well, but some of the men did start to intermarry with some of the local women. And at one point, one of the tribal leaders invited all of them to a feast.
The perfect lunch combo. That first bite of your favorite sub, followed by ice-cold Pepsi. Add a couple of friends, and now that's next level. Suddenly, the laughs get louder, the stories keep flowing, and the food tastes better. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
And they were starting to get along a little bit better. And then they went to this feast at the tribes, at their camp where they lived, and they had what they didn't tell the Templars was they invited some other tribes to ambush them, and they killed them all, except for four men survived, and they got away. And about 2 weeks after the attack, they were rescued. A search party came looking for them, and they were rescued. That's why we know this story. It's an incredible story, but it's a sad one too. They missed it by 2 weeks. But some people say that they kind of brought it on themselves because they raped the women and they beat the men and forced them to work for them. And so I guess some people might say they got what they asked for, but just an incredible story. The skull and crossbones is something that everybody is aware of what that is, and of course it's associated with pirates. But it actually goes back to the 1st century, to the ossuary culture of Jerusalem, and specifically Jesus's people, the Essene. And basically what they used to do is, and the Essene were a highly educated group. They were basically the PhDs of their day in their sect. And just to be quite frank, the Roman Church has put a completely different spin on who these people were and what they were all about, and it's all fiction. I mean, the truth is these were the elite in their society. They were teaching the ancient mysteries, which is nothing more than the 7 classic arts and sciences. And these people were people of means. They had money, because it costs money to build these underground tombs that they used for their burials, for interring their dead. But the practice at the time was only the family could process the bodies. And what they would do is take the deceased loved one, bring them to one of these underground chambers that was basically comprised of 2 rooms. One was the burial chamber, the other was what they called the antechamber, or the front room, which was open to the world, but it was sort of carved into the hill, into the bedrock. And then they would process the bodies with perfume and oils, and then they would put them inside of a bench inside the tomb, the burial chamber. And it would be just like a shell for a bench carved into the rock. And then they would leave, excuse me one sec, I'm going to have to call Darwin back. And then they would leave the bodies for 1 to 2 years. They would decompose, and then they would come back and collect the bones and put them inside of a stone box called an ossuary, which was only big enough so that the 2 largest bones in the body would fit inside, crossed to the 4 corners, and then they would put the skull in last. That's the origin of the skull and crossbones. Mm-hmm. So it is certainly a symbol of death, but it's also a symbol of reverence for Jesus. And so that skull and crossbones, when it was being flown by the pirates, you can make the argument that that was a Templar symbol. And it is to this day in Freemasonry. The skull and crossbones is a symbol of the Knights Templar. It's controversial. It's beyond controversial. I mean, this particular tomb, there's one of these tombs in Jerusalem that was discovered in 1980, but it was really suppressed. Nobody in Israel wanted to say a thing about it. The archaeologists looked at each other and said, "I'm not going there. And you? Heck no." Anyway, they kept it quiet, but Simcha Jacobovici brought it to the world in 2007 with a documentary, and of course that was suppressed by the church did everything they could to suppress it as well. But the truth has a way of bubbling to the surface. But this particular tomb that was found in 1980 had 10 ossuaries, or these bone boxes, inside of it. 7 of them inscribed with names. 6 in Aramaic, which is early Hebrew, and 1 in Greek. And the names are inscribed on the boxes are Jesus, son of Joseph. But back in that time, there was no J in the alphabet, and his name was Yeshua. son of Joseph. Then there's another one that says James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Another one that says Matthew. Another one that says Joseph, brother of Jesus. Another one that says Judah, son of Jesus. Another ossuary says Maria. And the seventh ossuary, the one that's carved in Greek, says Mariamne Mara. Mariamne is a pet name for Mary Magdalene, only Mary Magdalene, found in the Acts of Philip. And the Mara is a title of honor, as in Lord, Master, or Queen. So she was important. And in fact, she was also teaching the ancient mysteries, because back in their time, both men and women were teachers, if you will. So, wow, that's amazing, right? And it's a long, it's a long story, and really only in the last year has it really settled in, and science has proven that these are the names, and that, you know, the odds are astronomical, millions to one, that it can only be the royal family. So, that's a big shock, and that's why Simca in 2007 went through so much trouble. But my research that started with the Kensington runestone and the Spirit Pond runestones, the Narragansett runestone, the Newport Tower, went to Sweden, went to the Templars, the Cistercians, and then to Jerusalem, following the Templar trail. And so when I first found out about the Telpiat tomb, there were some things that the Israeli scholars were wrestling with and struggling with as far as symbolism, and they didn't really understand some of the things that were going on, like the X carved in front of Jesus, son of Joseph's name, on his ossuary. And I told them that the X is a symbol of initiate, somebody who's been educated in the ancient mysteries. And then they shared with me that there are a number of ossuaries in this area of Jerusalem with X's on the boxes that they don't think are maker's marks. Well, they're probably people that had been initiated into the sect of the Essene and were initiated. So that would have been, like a Freemason tombstone. A Mason's going to want the compass and square on his tombstone, right? I mean, it's equivalent of that. So that's how I was able to, gain credibility with them and help them with a number of things that they just didn't know about that I did. So that's 3-4 years ago now. And about a year ago, almost a year and a half ago now, one of the researchers, a guy by the name of Charlie Pellegrino, who's just a super guy. I've met him in personally, and we hit it off right away. And he wrote the first book about the Telpiat tomb with Simca Jacobovici. It's called The Jesus Family Tomb. And he contacted me through a mutual friend. He was like the only guy I hadn't met. And he said, "Hey, Scott, Charlie Pellegrino, I'd like you to look at some pictures of a symbol that's carved on the lid of the Jesus ossuary. Jesus, son of Joseph, or Yeshua, is carved on the side of the box. And this symbol carved on the lid has never been published. No one's ever seen it, except anyone that's examined the box and paid attention." And he sent these pictures to me. And they said, "We think this is a star symbol," meaning him and Simca and some of the other guys. And when I opened the pictures up, I almost fell on the floor. I couldn't believe it. Because what I saw was not one symbol, but two symbols. A monogram of two symbols intertwined with each other. One was my hooked X, a perfect, no question about it, hooked X, just like on the runestone, just like on the Spirit Pond runestones and the Narragansett runestones, and the Templar documents that I have seen and published. And then there was another symbol that was just below the center, and it's a Tau cross, which looks like a capital T. So I wrote back and I told them what I saw, and every one of them agreed with me. They all saw it. And I said, first off, these lines don't come all from the center. It doesn't look like a star. There's no symmetry. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's two symbols. And they all agreed with me.
the perfect lunch combo. That first bite of your favorite sub, followed by ice-cold Pepsi. Add a couple of friends, and now that's next level. Suddenly, the laughs get louder, the stories keep flowing, and the food tastes better. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole fam.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
It's amazing. It is incredible. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that, all I saw were pictures, and you can see they're close up. I had no idea what its relative orientation was on the lid. I didn't know if it was in the middle, on the top, on the bottom, or where it was, and where was it relative to the Jesus, son of Joseph inscription. Well, these images he sent me was last summer. And this winter, in March, we went on a family vacation down to San Diego. And we took one day, we drove up to Los Angeles to see the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition in LA. And that ossuary and the Mariamne ossuaries were on display in that exhibition. And I went there specifically to see if I could see that symbol on the lid. And boy, the hooked X gods were smiling on me that day, because the symbol is front and center on the lid of the box, right next to the inscription. And they had put that ossuary right in the front behind the glass. I was literally, my nose was 4 inches away from it, and I could see it beautifully. The light was a direct overhead light, and if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't have seen it. But I knew it was there, and I could see it clear as day. And it's just incredible. It's not a maker's mark. It's not an alignment mark. It's clearly a monogram of two symbols, and I think I know what it means. But the significance of that for my research cannot be overstated. It just can't. Well, it's funny. I was like everybody else. I'd always heard the story about Captain Kidd being a pirate, and he was hung 3 times in London for his crimes, and that's really all you get when you're in school, and that's true with just about any historical story. You just don't have time to dig deep enough, and oftentimes new information comes forward that dramatically alters or completely changes the picture in the context of who these people were and what it was that they supposedly did. Now, in Captain Kidd's case, there's no doubt that he married into wealth, and he went to London to get a commission to be a privateer, and he got a commission, and he went out to basically hunt down pirates, is what he was supposed to do. But what happened was he had a crew, and part of it was because of his own arrogance. He pissed off the Royal Navy, and when his crew, they were going by the royal yacht, they dropped their pants and they mooned the Queen's ship, and so they went down and they pulled the ship over and they boarded it, and they basically took his best men for the Royal Army, and they just took him. So he was left shorthanded. He came to America, and he scraped up whatever he could. He got basically a bunch of thieves and hoodlums to fill out his crew. So he had a nasty bunch that he went to work with. He was in the Indian Ocean, and they really, at one point, they were having some really poor success. The ship was falling apart, and they ended up scuttling the Adventure Galley in Madagascar in Pirate Cove. I mean, that did happen. So I think there's a really good chance that the ship that Barry says is Captain Kidd's probably is Captain Kidd's, regardless of what UNESCO says. But anyway, they went, at one point, he went almost a year or over a year where they didn't pull over any ships. And you got to remember, these pirate ships, his crew and he got a big share of the booty. They had to give some of it back to the crown, but they got a large portion of that booty. And these guys were getting restless. So what happened is he ended up pulling over a ship that had papers that made it legal for them to, they had French papers, but they also had English papers. So this guy was carrying goods for both the crown and for France. And so Kidd had to make a decision. And because of the pressure from his crew that basically threatened a mutiny, he decided to take the ship. And so that really was where things turned for him. And, we don't know for sure exactly what happened, because the bad stuff that he did, he's probably not going to write it down, is he? And, the records are pretty scant, but the evidence seems to point that he may have done some more of that. But, in the context of the situation, he basically had to decide, I'm either going to have mutiny and be killed, or I'm going to take this ship that I probably shouldn't, and it's going to save my life, and I'll worry about the consequences later. And that's basically what happened. I think what happened is there were other things going on that were beyond his control with his financial backers in America, and they just decided that he had become too big of a risk, and the easiest thing to do was to get rid of him. So they basically, he went to Governor Bellamont in Boston to try to get him to support him, and so that he could talk his way out of it. And Bellamont threw him in jail. And I'm sure there were other players involved, and he probably cut a deal with the crown and said, hey, if I give you Kidd, he'll get some concessions. I don't know what they were. I don't think history will ever know what they were, but that kind of stuff happens all the time. That's business. I mean, it's one of those really good stories, and the story that you hear is good, but there's so much more to it that's just amazing. The whole Gardner Island story, where before he went to Boston, he buried a treasure. He asked the Gardner family if he could bury treasure there, and he gave them gifts, and we were able to see part of one of those gifts, and then Bellamont went and recovered that treasure, but he was going to use that as a bargaining chip. And didn't work, obviously. Well, it was a place where they could get goods, cheap goods, and gold and silver and jewels. I mean, down in Sri Lanka, right there off the southern coast of India, is where probably the richest area in the world for different gemstones. And so they would make a profit that was 100 times what they had into it. So they were making money hand over fist, and they were shipping all of these rituals or these riches back to Portugal. The problem is you have to go by Madagascar and Pirate Cove, and it was a perfect place for pirates to hang out and pick off those ships. You had no choice. You either had to go between Madagascar and the continent of Africa, or you went out farther in the Indian Ocean. But either way, they were sitting there waiting for you, just like sitting ducks, these ships coming by. So, but the Templars made tremendous amount of money. They founded that city of Goa back in the early 1500s, and they had a colony there that went for about 200 years just making money. They built churches, cathedrals, the basilica. They just filled it with gold and jewels and treasures. And I mean, it was just, what's left is fantastic. But imagine what it was like back then. And then eventually they, politically things changed. There were different lords and kings in India that were not happy with, the Catholic religion. And so it just got to a point where they had to get out of there, and they loaded up their ships and sent them back. But not all of them made it back. Some of them were picked off by pirates. Well, it was St. Anthony of, it's not the St. Anthony that everybody thinks of, and I can't remember which St. Anthony it was. And so there was some people that got confused and actually got upset. Said, well, that's not right. and it's basically the patron saint of stolen things, stolen articles. And so for somebody a pirate that's stealing things all the time, that became their patron saint. And I think it was probably asking forgiveness, or maybe they used it as a talisman or a good luck charm to protect them for their misdeeds. Oh, exactly. And there was a lot of heretical stuff that I saw and go as well, that I've always claimed the leadership of the Templars embraced. And that was this monotheistic dualism that the hooked X symbolizes. So I saw it there. I mean, I saw some of the most heretical stuff I've ever seen, and it makes me wonder why they did it and how they were able to get away with it. And I think the reason they were able to get away with it is because they were so far from Europe that, who's going to check on them except occasional Jesuit that shows up on one of their ships. And, is he going to go back and tattle on them? I mean, I don't know. I obviously they weren't too worried about it, but none of that stuff made the show. But I saw some of the most amazing things that I just couldn't believe. It was incredible. I mean, we shot a lot of stuff that didn't make it into the show, and it was really good stuff. I was telling you about how the Templars loaded up their ships, including and they took all the gold and the artifacts and the gold.
The perfect lunch combo. That first bite of your favorite sub, followed by ice-cold Pepsi. Add a couple of friends, and now that's next level. Suddenly, the laughs get louder, the stories keep flowing, and the food tastes better. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
Religious articles, which included something called the Flaming Cross of Goa, which was a 300-pound gold cross that was encrusted with jewels and diamonds and emeralds and sapphires, and it took 3 men to carry it, and that was probably the crown jewel of all the treasure. And they loaded it up on the Nassau ship, and they headed back to Portugal. Unfortunately, that ship was intercepted not far off the coast of India by the pirate Labuz, and he raided the ship. He took everything off of it, and it disappeared into history. And as we said in the show, the Labuz was eventually captured, and before he was hung, he threw out a Masonic box code, a pigpen cipher. It's very similar to the Masonic box code. And he said, anyone who finds my treasure, if you can figure out this code. And to this day, nobody's figured it out. The problem with those pigpen ciphers is they're very easy to change. I mean, to make the cipher, to figure it out is not very difficult, but all you have to do is shift things over 1 or 2 or 3 places, and the whole code changes. And if you don't know what the shift is, no, listen, I appreciate it. You guys are helping me out here, and we are looking to do some more fun things here. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be doing, but we are in the planning stages right now. So I really had a great time working with Barry and his crew. I didn't spend a lot of time actually with them, but when I did, we had fun. And I thought it was really neat the way they kept going, okay, here's where Scott is, here's where Barry is, and the globe would tip around, and it was fun. And I really enjoyed my experience, and stay tuned. We'll see what happens moving forward. But I appreciate you guys having me on. I always have fun, and there's more to come.